So my name is Rose Sang. Together with myself and my co-host, we've been moderating and facilitating the various sessions and engaging with the various brand ambassadors so that then we gain as women within the space. So I'll request that you kindly put our computers.
Yes, my name is Mary and I've been wearing this electrode for the last 20 days.
If we could kindly mute ourselves so that then we can be able to continue to engage. So they say mentorship is not about somebody walking ahead of you to show you how they do it. A mentor walks alongside you to show you what you can do. And so we'll just have a quick recap of what the 6 months has looked like. Walking alongside, the various brand ambassadors, learning from them, sitting on their feet, and, just pretty much engaging and asking, being vulnerable within that space. So Kantai, if you could please share just, the various slides around the 6 months, and then we can get on to the program. Excellent. So we started off the first month with a panel discussion where Catherine and, a few other board members had sat through and, just talked about the journey around leadership on boards. How does culture, and gender influence leadership? How do we lead across the different generations? And why does diversity in boards actually matter? So that sort of set the stage for us to be able to now get into the nitty-gritty around board effectiveness. Then Rita was up next, and she talked about board dynamics, what makes a great board. How do you facilitate the right conversations within the boardroom? How do you build cohesive and inclusive teams? We know that Rita has been a board member, both in the private and the private sector and the public sector. And then finding common ground to manage conflict within the boardroom. Our second ambassador was Flora, who again, spoke about effective board leadership. What does that look like? What defines an effective board? How do you handle boards with leadership gaps? So if you do have a board chair, who in your perspective, perhaps isn't driving it well, how do you then handle that gap? And then handling board decisions where you don't agree. How do you graciously give feedback so that then you don't come out as being, obnoxious within that space? Our third ambassador was Dr. Julius Kipngetich, who talked about boards that deliver. So how do you move from corporate governance corporate governance compliance to competitive advantage? How do you turn boards into high-performing teams? And within the new normal, what are the skills requirements that you need to be able to build capabilities? And he shared quite a bit within that space and, had the opportunity to come back and do another session as well. So we had 2 sessions with Dr. Kipngetich. The fourth ambassador was none other than John Gumi. John has led several public sector boards. And so he was speaking to the topic around boards that lead. So when do you take charge as a chair? When do you partner, with the various stakeholders by virtue of you being appointed? And when do you stay away from boards? So we had interesting conversations around KEPSA, around, Kenya Pipeline. And some of the subtopics that he handled were, performance-driven accountability, especially in public sector boards. How do you hold them to account? How do you create a good balance between competing stakeholder interests? How do you lobby the various board members as well as the stakeholders as well? Difficult conversations in the boardroom, especially where, you need to possibly even fire the CEO. And then, as ladies, how can we then stay out of our comfort zone? And John has a special message for us as we go through the graduation, which Catherine will be delivering a little later. And last but not least, we had Patricia, who spoke about, how do you play the game as a woman? How do you brand and manage yourself? How do you engage in smart self-promotion? Because you're sitting at the table, by virtue of your competence and experience, not necessarily as a woman. How do you play confidence, even when you feel powerless? So you are in a committee, you perhaps feel that you don't have the technical capability, but then how do you display that confidence? And then what are the do's and don'ts in the boardroom? Do you serve tea? Do you pray all the time? How do you manage those nuances? And so today we have our 7th session where we then will be engaging with our guest speaker to give us, his thoughts, having gone through the 6 months of what it is that it will take for us to be able to then get into boards, lead, and perhaps become, better board members. So we'll be introducing our guest speaker very, very shortly. So in a nutshell, that sums up the 6 weeks. And we're looking forward to seeing you ladies apply, what you have learned in the various boards and leadership positions that you will undertake. So at this juncture, you can confirm if Patrick is with us?
Yes, he is.
Okay. So allow me to then perhaps invite you ladies, as we prepare our guest speaker, to just, speak to your experience within, the last 6 months. What are some of the things that have jumped out for you? What are some of the things that perhaps you might want to give us feedback as well? Because I always say feedback is like a gift. You accept it, graciously. So let's hear from you around the experience as we prepare our guest speaker to come and speak to us this evening. So any ladies, you can just put up your hand and we shall be able to unmute you. Yes, Rosemary, I can see your hand is up. Thank you for leading the pack.
Okay, Rose, thank you. Yeah, basically this was a very enriching experience. For some of us, particularly those who have already served on boards, it was just a good reminder of what we know. But it was also a good learning in the sense that we learned some real life aspects of board service that are not taught in mainstream education. They're not taught in mainstream professional training. So this was really unique because it's really telling us, giving us information that we're going to actually be able to apply whilst serving on boards. For example, how to manage conflict that is arising within the board. We also discussed how to manage gender biases on the board, because there will be that aspect that you're female, and at the moment, because we're saying there's a lot more men than women, so we're taught also how to manage such situations, as well as how to leverage our femininity on the board and actually look at our femininity as being a strength rather than a handicap. We also left with some nuggets, very useful nuggets, like confidence is about not fearing to be wrong, rather than from always being right. Actually, no human can be right all the time. So what we need to do is just not be scared of being wrong. The other thing also was that what is holding us back at times is not what we are, but rather it is what we think that we are not. And this highlighted the need then to know ourselves. We need to know ourselves well, and to therefore have conversations with ourselves so that we can achieve that end of knowing ourselves, so that we can be able to actually see our strengths. Yeah, so it was a very good experience. And also when we went into the rooms, we were able to exchange experiences. The ladies came out and we came out and said, I've been through this and I've been through that, and we're able to discuss. And it was a very enriching experience. I really thank Women on Boards Network for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. Very good summary. Actually, you have nailed it. I didn't need to say any more. So Naomi, Jerry, you want to give a testimonial as well?
Thank you, Rose. I think for me, it's been a learning experience. Being able to really learn from the best, like we say, learning from the giants. I think it's been quite a learning experience, especially on 3 things. One of them being the ability to increase our possibility space, given the new information that it's possible to even lead be a chair in a public sector board. So increasing that possibility space. Then, of course, the issue of adding value and progressive thinking. This came out quite clearly during the mentorship, and I was able to pick on that. Then the issue of managing yourself as a women leader in boards, even in very dynamic boards, and being able to shape the future for the organization that you are serving. So it was quite a learning opportunity, and I thank the Women on Boards Network and also the ambassadors for the time they offered to mentor us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. for those kind words and also for sharing, some of the aspects that you learned. So at this juncture, I'd like to invite our guest speaker for this evening. He is a gentleman that is an avid supporter of women initiatives. I first interacted with him when I was moderating a session for IHRM during COVID, and he was speaking to the topic around, business continuity planning. How do we do it as HR? And what are some of the things we need to look at? So today it is such an honor to have him with us. And so I'll quickly introduce him before I can give him the space to be able to speak to us. So he is a mechanical engineer by profession with over 35 years working experience in senior management positions and wide experience in the oil and gas industry. Notably, he's well thought out in supporting women in leadership in various spaces and organization, and ensures the organization strategy reflects the market where women form 50%, if not more. He has a database of women where he makes referrals for opportunities he comes up with, and also asks for referrals from women on boards, such as, in the Kenya Golf Open. He upheld to get a female onto the board because he believes that it is above running an event and not a man's event, which needs a female touch, even more so. He has extensive experience serving on diverse boards, such as non-for-profit institutions. He's been the chairman of LVCT Health, a trustee at KEPSA, formerly chairman of the board, as well as a managing consultant in Eduardo and Associate. He's a fellow of the African Leadership Initiative East Africa and a member of Aspen Global Leadership Network. Ladies, please welcome none other than Mr. Patrick Obath. Patrick, Karibu, the platform is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me just check on audio. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. And it's my pleasure again to be back here speaking to such a varied group of women at different stages on their leadership journey, and especially on the leadership journey into boards. I have been on boards for the last, I think now it's coming to about 15 years in different areas. And just for those who probably don't know me that well, I actually have never been on a board in the area that I was employed in until about 6 months ago. So most of the years I've not been on a board that reflected where I used to work. And I'll come back to why that is an important thing for those of you who are considering getting onto boards or progressing into boards in the future. But let me start first of all by just giving a little history about boards. If you look at the very early boards in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, a lot of these were purely old boy networks. Somebody brought in friends that they knew, people they went to school with, and it was a search basically to have people who are comfortable with each other that can sit around, and boards used to listen to management presenting to the board. They'd nod their heads and feel really good, and the company is doing very well. And if it wasn't, they'd say, why isn't the company doing very well? What are you doing about it? And more or less, it was all around just challenge them, but don't give any insights and so forth, and let them get on with it. And if they can't get on with it over some time, then you say, hey, come on, guys, old chaps, let's get rid of this guy and get another one, because it doesn't seem to be doing anything. He doesn't know what he's doing. And it was all around meeting, having cigars and whiskey, listening to that, and then going out for dinner. And that was the end of your day for being a board member. And I think in the 50s and 60s, then the nature of boards changed. When the stock exchanges were established, and you then found that some of the listed companies overexpanded or became too big, and then they collapsed. And then the regulators began to ask, why is a company collapsing and yet there is a board sitting which should be supervising the activities of that particular, of that company? So regulations began to come in about what was expected of boards and what they needed to do in terms of oversight of the companies. But these regulations came in very, very slowly. And it was all around the fact that, you must be involved in understanding what the business is doing, how it is operating, and it focused a lot on the financials, right? Because obviously companies collapsing as they're expanding meant that the financials that were being presented to the board were not really reflecting the reality of how the financials in that board were operating. And gradually, yes, the fiduciary responsibility came in, and that still remains the main activity of board members, is to exercise fiduciary oversight within a board. But then you had the famous activity in Singapore when I think it's one of the banks went under, because one of the staff members began playing around with some derivatives and some financial instruments. I'm not a financial person, so I can't tell you the details of how it was. But there's a guy called Gleason, and he over-invested, over-promised on the returns of a particular bank. And what that did, obviously, was when people began to call in their money, the bank didn't have the money to pay them, and the bank collapsed. And so people then began to say the fiduciary responsibility should be should be tightened in terms of looking at the risks of some of the operations that an organization is doing. And since then, the whole area of board operations have changed, and the expectations on you being on a board have also grown in terms of what it is that a board member is expected to do. But in all the time when this was developing, the role of a board, most of the boards were men. And so if you look at the way boards operated, it was still around men who knew each other, men who sat around, and that is how they would run the board. So, yeah, there was a bit of music. I don't mind it, actually. But you would get the dynamics in a board was basically a bunch of men. Some of them knew each other very well, others didn't, but they all had this kind of dynamics around men sitting in a room and sort of playing around with each other's emotions and working that way. And if you look at the way a lot of the meetings are run and so forth from that time, it was always on the basis of that kind of dynamic. And when women started coming on boards, obviously it created a shock in that area, and people were sort of a bit skeptical about adding this, the gender into the board, and sometimes women were sort of put aside in the corner. They were not listened to. They're not allowed to talk, but they're put in. A lot of them are put in because of either family issues, family boards, or whatever it is. And some of them came on board because of the fact that they were actually promoted within the organization, a CEO becoming a director and then sitting on the board. But when that happened, you found the rest of the board was saying, okay, fine, she's been promoted, but what value is she really bringing on the board? I think her role is to sort of run the company. But we listen to her anyway, listen to the company, ask the right questions, and then afterwards, the management can leave and we can continue doing our business. So it took a bit of time for the dynamics on boards to change. And fast forward to today, in reality, the current boards are a lot more accepting of women sitting there. Some of the older men sitting on boards, and unfortunately, whilst we're talking about gender diversity, age diversity hasn't hit a lot of the boards. So you're finding that the boards have got much older people set in their ways, having their own prejudices and sitting in a board. And you can find that it can be quite abrasive, especially if you have a chairman that doesn't know how to run a meeting properly. So I think you've heard a lot from the previous mentors that you had around board dynamics and how the boards run and the kind of things that boards do. So I don't really want to go into those details, but I just like to share some experiences around really when you get into a board, what difference can you make? What difference can an individual make inside a board when you go in? And one of the key things about going on a board is don't ask to be included in a board because you want to be on a board. A lot of people says, Patrick, I'm experienced in this area and everything else. I'd like to go on a board. But it is all around what you bring to the board. That is the most important thing that you should have very clear in your mind when you go into a board. And if you look at high-performing boards now, that is the key thing. Everybody in that board understands fully what they have brought on board into that organization. And you have to understand why you're going into the board. Why are you applying even to be included in the board? Because these days, that network of saying, I know so and so, can we consider them for the board? More and more boards are actually going out and doing procurement for people, going with an HR agency or a special agency that procures people for the board, and they shortlist based on the specification that people are given in terms of the kind of person they need on the board. So when you go in, you must go into that board very assertive about what you are bringing onto that board and be bullish about it, right? You may have a couple of meetings just to sort of get to understand the dynamics of the board, but at the end of the day, you are brought in for a specific reason. Establish that you are that person so that people begin to respect. But there will be challenges. It doesn't matter what gender you're in. It doesn't matter who it is. When you come into a board, you have to really establish your niche in that board. And once you establish your niche, make sure that, in fact, you are always abreast of what is required to show your expertise in that area. One of the boards where which I left recently, we said that technology, IT, is going to be the biggest thing in the future. And as a result of that, we need to bring somebody in whose key skills are actually to disrupt the thinking of the company in the IT area, because a lot of our products, it was a bank actually, and a lot of our products that we want to put out was going to be on platforms, because the future of the financial institutions was never going to be in a branch where you go and sit with somebody. It's going to be the access that you have on the face of a mobile phone. And the person who understood that kind of thing is somebody who is younger. But when you get somebody who's younger, how much board experience do they have? Most of the time, it is zero. So the specification we said was around the technical skills and the insights they can bring into the board. And I told the board that you must teach this person board matters. Don't dismiss them because they're not experienced. So the person we brought into that board was somebody who had no board knowledge or very little board knowledge from that, but was very, very good in the subject matter. And I told the board, listen, guys, this person is going to disrupt the way we think. And we should not dismiss what that person is bringing to the table because we are not familiar with it. But we've asked them to come in because they are going to tell us what the future is. So when you go into a board, that kind of mindset, I think, is important. Even if it is somebody who is a little bit older, whatever it is, and you've got a bit of board experience, going in with a mindset that you're actually going there because of the value you're going to add to the board sets you on a journey in the board to say, I am going to be in there and I'm going to make sure they understand that I'm the expert. But it is not about barging in and making sure that you hog the space to shout about your expertise. It's about choosing the moments around when you talk to people and you make your expertise felt. And in about a board meeting or two, you will ask people, you'll find people asking, what does so-and-so think about this matter? Because that then means that people have begun to realize that you are the expert in that particular area. And you've got to keep ahead of the fact that once you've told them about something, they also, quote, quote, become knowledgeable about that particular aspect that you told them about. So you've always got to be ahead of the thinking. You've got to be looking at the frontiers. You've got to be looking at the cutting edge of whatever area of expertise that you have, so that at certain points, you can also bring in what you need from some insights that you have that maybe the industry or even that particular company, the board, does not know going in that direction. So your role as an individual, as a board member, really will change. You should continue upgrading your knowledge right through that time. That means that the whole issue of board dynamics is key. And if ever you come up to being a chair or you're offered to sit down as a chair, you've got to understand that your role is to allow people to challenge, but not to intimidate, because that does happen. And if you go into the board and you think somebody is challenging you and you feel that they want to intimidate you because you're a woman, start thinking differently. Because that is the reality on boards, is that people begin to knock heads, and you got to have the strength to be the person to be able to not to knock back, but to absorb the knock and hit back, or not hit back, but just go back with saying that I understand fully what you're coming from, but my view is X, Y, and Z, and talk around the other way. Now, when you talk about where boards are going in the future, you all know about governance. You also know about about all the things that boards are supposed to do, conflicts of interest, etc., etc. All those are things that I think Catherine and team have probably talked to you about in details, about the do's and don'ts around the board. But begin to consider, I sit on several boards, and one of the things that people normally say is you should not bring the two board issues together. But I hold a different view, because an effective board member of the future will see that one organization has got a product which is very good, and another organization where you are in would actually benefit from that product or that process. And why would it be allowed to introduce the two of them organizations so that they could both make money out of the interaction? A lot of people call this conflict of interest. And some people have begun to say, no, you can't tell somebody else about what we're doing here. But I believe actually that when you're doing it in an open manner that everybody understands, that you're not influencing the decision process. But what you're doing is you're giving information across different organizations about things that you know, things that you've heard. If I'd heard about the same thing and I wasn't on that board, and somebody else had told me, and I went and brought it to the other board, would that be a conflict of interest? Probably not. But because I sit inside that board, I'm not giving any advantage to the other board. All I'm doing is informing them about this cutting edge technology, these new products that somebody has introduced to the market. And maybe that other board doesn't know. And you tell them, this is the way it works. Can you guys go and talk? And you introduce them and you leave it out of that. So the bringing of value into business, into boards, is not only about the contacts that you can bring in that you know about the business of that board only, but it's cross-fertilization across maybe 2 or 3 boards where you're able to discern across their businesses that something could actually work if they got together as companies and started doing things together. Now that is adding value, but you have to be very careful when you're operating in that particular area, because sometimes if the procurement process is such that you are sitting on the procurement committee on one and the procurement committee on the other, it will be seen as a conflict of interest, especially when the product is being touted to somebody else and you're sitting on the decision on both sides. So when you look at boards now and you begin to talk about value, adding value to the organization when you're in, you have to have your antenna open in a lot of areas outside of your normal business. And a lot of things you may be hearing out there, whilst not directly connected to your business, could be an opportunity for that business to explore, because you tell them, why don't you consider looking at this? Because I know that there is this need from somewhere else to come into this business. And the issue of innovation in boards and bringing innovative ideas or innovative challenges into the board is an area that now a lot of us begin to sort of put onto the table when you're sitting in the board. It may sound operational, but it isn't. It's all around insights, around what is going on around the country, around the environment where you live, where you eat, where you breathe, whatever it is, and you're bringing those insights in. And sometimes it's not around strategy. It's around developing scenarios for the future. Boards need to be looking much, much longer into the future, but also remembering that when you look from scenarios to strategy to annual plans and what is happening, the pace of change today, even between today and tomorrow, is very, very rapid. So the traditional way boards used to operate in terms of long-term strategies is gone. You are talking about working with much shorter strategic periods, which almost become that your strategic plan is almost an annual plan. And you have this long-term scenario look, but making sure that your strategic shifts that are happening in a short while, you are able to ensure that whilst a lot of things are changing, they are all contributing to the long-term scenario that you think is going to play out in that area. And technology is driving that very rapidly. The connectivity around the world means that something happening in another part of the world can affect your business here. And as a board member sitting on the board, you have got to be having that kind of antenna in your area of specialization. I mean, who would have known, for example, that the war in Ukraine is going to impact on Kenya? And not on the fact that that war was happening, but the impact of that war on trade routes, etc., the impact of that war on food and so forth will impact on this, and much, much quicker than that kind of thing would impact on on our environment here compared to 20 or 30 years ago. So as a board person going in, the breadth of knowledge that you're expected to have to bring onto the table is increasing. And so self-education, getting to know the world around you and in your area of specialization, and then trying to not extrapolate, but I think almost interpolate, bring them back in to what you're doing is very, very important. So the traditional areas of working on the board in terms of all these offices and all these committees and so forth, that is bread and butter. But the big thing now around being on a board is to be able to look, observe, and bring that back into the table. And you can also challenge your leadership team, the management, based on your view about what is going to happen. And they'll go and have a look and see what might be happening, and they'll come back. Yeah. COVID taught people a lot of things because COVID was happening almost every other day. Things were changing, and you had to change how you're running the company over time until things stabilized. And a lot of companies developed those skills at that time. When you go to boards now, you're going to go onto boards that have worked through those kind of scenarios, and they've been able to change the way that they work, the way that the way they discuss things, and the kind of stuff they bring onto the agenda. So being on a board is an evolutionary process. Gone are the days that you used to sit on the board and things would write and so forth and so on. One of the, and going into conclusion, and I hope that this is about the length of time that you wanted me to speak for. Going into the sort of some of the things that are emerging for me. A lot of boards do not actually have an annual work plan. Does a board have their own KPIs that they have to deliver? Do you see yourself as being a member of a management team sitting at the board, where you as a committee chair, as a member of a committee, has got to drive the board's participation with management to achieve an outcome that can be measured as a board. And that your performance in that board will then be measured by the annual plan and deliverables that a board has. That is on the way if your board already doesn't have it. And if you've not been on boards, you shouldn't be surprised when in the near future, you're actually going to have an annual work plan for the board, where each board member will have a KPI that is going to measure how much value they bring to the board. Some of them could be soft KPIs, others could be hard KPIs. And you then wonder, why am I sitting in a board? I thought this was for management. But you have a duty to the shareholder. And shareholders are becoming very intrusive in terms of what happens into boards, because the shilling they've invested and the return they expect to continuously get is being driven by a bunch of us board members. And how do they hold us accountable? They will hold us accountable in terms of the organization's performance as a board. So we, as board members, need to have very clear KPIs that tell us we are going to deliver for the shareholder in terms of the returns and so forth. And if not, at the annual general meeting, as a chairman of a board, I should be able to stand up and not just hide behind the fuddly figures that are normally given by the finance manager. Around, we had this particular thing that trocked that, we had this that trocked that, and so forth. As a board member, if the financials have gone wrong, and we're in charge of ensuring that we give strategic direction, we have to be able to answer as to why that strategic direction we were not able to put into place mitigations to minimize the impact of that thing. Unless there's a perfect storm brewing, which everybody will know, or when you say, they'll say yes. Examples of this included some 10, 15 years ago in Europe and America, when they started challenging the amount of money that was being paid to financial institution managers vis-a-vis the performance of those financial institutions. And they were saying, we are not getting good enough dividends, and yet you're superinflating the pay of the various managers of the financial institutions. And you are almost getting shareholder revolts at that time because of it. And you can be sure that this is going to spread beyond just the financial institutions. They're going to become the standard thing that board members are going to be held accountable for the day-to-day, for the very detailed performance of an organization by the shareholder who you report to. And that is for listed boards. But you can be sure that when it happens on listed boards, it will very quickly cascade down to the normal boards, which are not listed, family boards, etc., that is what you'll be expected to do and report back to the shareholder, whether it is Patrick Obath who owns a company, or Patrick Obath and brothers who are the shareholders and they've given you as a board the right to run it, or state corporations, whatever it is. That's the future of being on a board, of being on the board. So, as people who are looking to go to boards, remember, boards are dynamic. The things that buffet a board can sometimes not even be known. But as an expert, when you go into the board, you should be able to plan how to quickly help the company to think through how they can overcome the kind of stresses that are coming to challenge how that company operates. If you are not in that situation, then don't go into a board, because the kind of stuff that Catherine and team do in terms of board evaluations and so forth will eventually come to a time when the evaluation will be something that can get you out of that board and kick you out of the board. So your personal performance is going to become a very, very important thing in the future. And be prepared to self-improve, learn, get your coaching, get your understanding that will ensure that you perform in the board in the areas of expertise that you've been put in. You will not sit there and just be expected to be an expert to be consulted. You will expect to be an expert, a contributor in that area, to not just be consulted, but to be bringing in the challenges that are necessary to grow that organization to go forward. So let me stop there and bring you back to Rose. Rose, I hope that I've taken just about the time that you allowed me to take, and I'm open for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. I don't know where the time went, but I wouldn't have minded another 10 minutes, listening to you speak about breaking ground, within the board, whether it's disrupting thinking as a result of, technology, or just being held accountable. So interesting thoughts right there. So I have a couple of questions from the ladies. One says, well, you talked about a board work plan. Perhaps just give us a bit more detail around what that looks like. Maybe share some examples of KPIs, because I know some of the ladies do sit in some of those committees and chair those committees. So it'll be interesting for them to hear a little bit about that.
Okay, a board work plan will normally be literally what management looks at the high level. So, for example, if you're going to grow, your market share by 5%, what does that growth of the market share? What are the key levers that are going to drive that? And once you understand the key levers, then each of the committees has got to be responsible for a lever or two. And those levers have got to be quantifiable. So for example,
sorry, Patrick, I think you're on mute. Okay.
I couldn't. Yeah,
yes,
I was
we
muted
left you at the levers.
Yeah, okay. Something muted because I don't know what it was. So as a committee, you have to understand which levers you are driving out of the levers that are going to give you that 5% market share. So let's take an organization that has got a manufacturing facility and their manufacturing stuff, which has got to be marketed in the fast-moving consumer goods area. So some of the levers that are going to give you the growth of market share is one of them is around your margin need. And your margin need is going to be driven by your internal costs and how you can control those ones. So those who are in the operation side will look at the manufacturing area and say, fine, the margin need to drive that market share is so much. How much is that particular aspect going to contribute to that? So as a board committee, you're going to say, we need to draw down the operating costs by 3%. Okay, it sounds like a management thing, but what does that 3% look like in terms of the details that the management is going to look at? As a board committee that is looking at operations, you might then work out as a board committee, which are the elements of reporting that management is going to do that will give you comfort that you are going to reduce the cost of operations by what you wanted to do. That's the first one. Then if you look at the HR committee, a similar thing will happen. How much are they going to contribute towards reducing the margin need? And once you've done all that, then that margin need reduction goes to the marketing people, and they now have something to go to the market with in terms of playing around with pricing, playing around with discounts, playing around with incentives, etc., to grow that volume. And that volume should then play back, even though you're giving away some of the margin that you actually, the margin compression that you did, margin expansion that you did by reducing costs, you are giving that away. So you got to grow volume in order to give you the market, to give you the market share and still retain profitability. So each of those committees will have a specific element that they're going to say, our operations are going to reduce our margin need by so much. And then management, these are the elements that you tell us will actually allow us to do that. So at the board meetings, you will then say, fine, HR, how are you doing in terms of, of reducing your operation cost by 3%? What percentage have you got to by now? And the chair of that board committee plus those board members are accountable for that in terms of delivering. Because at the end of the year, when you go back to the shareholder, you say, we were able to grow our market share by 5%. And the impact of that is as follows. The return to you as a shareholder is XYZ. And that is as a result of all these things that happened that we were able to deliver to you as a board. That then means that the board has reported back to the shareholder about the key elements that they were in charge of during that time. Management was in charge of the details. The board aggregated, and that is what was the key performance indicator. I hope that gives you the answer.
Thank you, Patrick. Very well broken down for us to be able to understand. Thank you for that. Mary Ngugi has a question around conflict. And she said, would a board member be seen to be in conflict if they were to offer to train staff members in an organization where they sit on a board at no cost?
If it's for free, I don't see a conflict. But if you have to charge them, certainly. Yeah. And if as a result of that, you then get paid things from the same staff member who then comes later, that you can't accept.
Mm.
But you're doing it because as a board member, sometimes you're giving insights, you're doing something to within the board, within the company. Sometimes you actually go and you talk to staff members from your experience, right? And you're actually transferring knowledge to them that you have free of charge, because that's your role as a board member.
Mm.
That's what you're paid for, or that's what you've offered to do if you're not paid on that board. But the minute you start earning from an organization that you're sitting in, then that represents a conflict of interest, even if it is sort of like third party removed. For example, if the company doesn't know, like for example, if I run a training company and my training company is bidding for work, I have to declare that that is a conflict of interest. And two things can happen. One, I can be removed from the process, because if my training company or my business is the only one in the country, you can't refuse to use it because of conflict of interest. What you do is you manage it. If you have no other option other than that, and you take these people completely out of the decision process, and you do it independently of that board member. But it's got to be very, very clearly documented as to how you've handled the process of handling this potential conflict of interest. Sometimes something may become apparent when even you didn't know about it, because there may be a cousin of a brother who is doing something else, and eventually they actually want a contract to work for you. The minute it becomes known, you have to declare it, and then the company has got to work out how they're going to manage that. Yeah. So yeah, as a board member, you can do work in the company, but never ever get paid.
Interesting. Betty has a question around board strategy. And she says the board is supposed to be agile, with no long-term planning, and strategy is almost to be reviewed biannually. Now, how does the board balance the strategic planning sessions or these engagements whilst retaining the minimum board requirements insofar as number of meetings are concerned?
People have this blinkers around number of meetings of a board. The general average is 4 board meetings a year. You look at the results at the end of each quarter and so forth and so on. And each year, the plan for each year should reflect the part of strategy you're supposed to deliver in that year. And if you're not able to deliver that part of strategy in that year, as part of your planning for the subsequent year, you have to review your strategic direction as a board and say what was delivered and what wasn't delivered in this particular year. And what do we carry over? What do we throw out, which cannot be done and will never be done anyway? We shouldn't carry it in our strategy, and make a conscious decision as you're planning the next year's annual plan based on your strategic direction, which you're measuring. But if a business is in crisis and you find that as a result of the crisis, you need to actually do a little bit more of fingers in, right? You have your noses in and you smell what is happening. And normally it's noses in, fingers out. But when you're in a crisis and management needs support, you may start putting a few fingers in. And the putting a few fingers in is saying, we want to very, very closely have oversight of the changing circumstances as we operate and try and get ourselves out of this mess. I'm in a company at the moment that exactly that is happening, and we formed a committee that meets every month in terms of trying to revive that organization. So you do that on a need basis, and therefore it means that you increase the frequencies. Once things are running well and the organization is good, your KPIs are being measured, you've got confidence in the systems and so forth, then your fingers go out and your noses go back in again. So I hope I've been able to give you just some insights into that, because the balance between meetings and and how much the board is involved in terms of day-to-day operations and keeping strategic direction is a very fine one. And it's something that your chairman should be able to understand when you need to do more, when you need to do less, when you talk about strategy, when you talk about fighting fires, and strategy is sort of put on the side once you correct the road, and then the strategy comes back.
Okay. Interesting analogy around fingers out, nose in. And the question here is around, a lot of the boards are very operational. So how do you move a board, are very operational. So how do you move a board from being operational to becoming more strategic, especially, within the not-for-profit, areas or government sort of parastatals?
I think it doesn't matter where the board is, even in the not-for-profit. I sit on some not-for-profit boards, and the key thing is to define what parameters will be the ones that will drive the board's engagement with the business. And if you find that the board committee, and this is the balance between the board committee and the board. The board committees are the ones that interrogate details. They look at the details of the financials. They look at the different indicators. HR will look at the detailed parameters, the HR committee. They will look at your attrition rate. They look at your cost of people. They look at your training levels, etc., at that level. But when it comes to the board, when the board is put together now as a board, you are then looking at the strategic items that arise out of the discussions at the committee level. So the committee level tends to look at things with a lot more granularity, and they want to understand in detail the drivers that management is looking at, and being able to say, fine, those drivers we agreed on are going in the right direction. And then at the board level, you're saying those drivers are actually influencing X and it's working. So that is how you set it up. But if you have management reporting to the board in terms of details about management, in terms of the detailed KPIs, that is when your board meeting will take 6 hours, because you are now micro looking at everything in detail, whereas that should happen at board committees. So in a way, the board does have a certain level of operational oversight at the board committees, but they don't run. They only look at the indicators that tells them that the operations are going well. And then at the full board level, they actually now just look at the aggregation of that in terms of the strategic direction of the organization. And that is how you have that continuum between strategy and then into the annual plans, and then into the detailed plans that the management looks at every quarter, and the board is able to review, just to be sure that the lines are moving towards the anticipated outcomes at the end of the year.
Thank you, Patrick. We certainly can't have enough of listening to you on this important topic. But I guess, like with any good thing, time has caught up with us. And so at this juncture, I'd like to invite Catherine, our chair, to be able to say a few words and walk with you insofar as graduating our mentees who've worked with us for the last 6 months. So Catherine, our chair, karibu sana.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rose. Good evening, everybody. And I have always said this, and I want to say it again. My journey with corporate governance started with Patrick, and I'm forever grateful to him for making me who I am in terms of corporate governance. Thank you, Patrick. And thank you for always being there for particularly those of us who are ladies and want to go into leadership. Thank you so, so much. And once again, allow me to congratulate you for winning the Women on Boards Award, being the male champion for Women on Boards. It is not by mistake, it is intentional. So thank you so much. A lot of the things that you have said, Patrick, are things that I have been struggling with. Just trying to, get boards to adopt them and to really start doing what you have been saying. KPIs. Every time I say to some boards, some of the boards I advise, you need KPIs. They're like, what? We're not management. Why should we have KPIs? We're not here every day. I say, you need a work plan. And they're like, okay, we have a schedule of meetings. We have a calendar of meetings. And I'm struggling. No, a work plan is much, much more than that. Thank you for emphasizing those points. Thank you for emphasizing innovation, being forward-looking. The role of a board is actually that. And unless we have boards that are really attuned into that and really take their roles seriously and are forward-looking, and I always say that the board is sitting on the watchtower and the management are here on the ground, and the two of them need to work together so that they can lead the army into fighting the war. So thank you for emphasizing that. Ladies, I want to congratulate you so, so much for having gone through the training, the mentorship. I think you have had so much and so many nuggets that you have received throughout the session. And this evening, really, there are so many nuggets. I could have listened to Patrick until tomorrow, but thank you so much. Patrick, now we have come to that session where if we were meeting physically, you would be handing out the certificate to each of the graduates. But because we are doing this virtually, we are going to do it differently. So on behalf of the board of Women on Boards Network, Patrick, I would like to hand over to you a certificate, a virtual certificate, so that you can hand it over to the ladies. And I want to request you to verbally authorize Kantai so that she can share that virtual certificate on your behalf. So over to you, Patrick.
Wow, you always catch me somewhere to sort of try and do things. But it is my pleasure for all of you who have been on this journey for the last 6 months to recognize that the 6 months is now over and you have taken a lot of learning, and that learning will be represented by the digital certificates that you get now. And that is a mark for each of you as it is presented now. And this recording can be an evidence that you received your certificate until your physical one does come. So it is now my pleasure to hand to all the graduates officially your certificate that marks the fact that you have completed your 6 months of training and mentorship on the Women's on Boards Network program. May I now authorize you to do it officially? So this, to each of you, is your certificate for the completion of the Women on Boards Network Ambassadors Board Mentoring Program that ran from November 2021 to April this year. I am proud and honored to present this certificate to all of you. Thank you very much, and I hope you put it to good use, especially when you start looking at your opportunities on boards or try to jostle for position on those boards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Ladies, may I request that you put on your videos and you receive the certificate. I want to congratulate each and every one of you on your graduation. Well done. And now, on behalf of the Women on Boards Network, allow me to request Kantai to play a special song, our special song for you as you graduate today, this evening. Kantai, please.
I know this world seems so big and everything seems so out of reach. The sky is high and the walk is wide. You just don't know what you've got yet. It's in the palm of your hands. It's right in front of where you stand. If you believe everything you dream will come true, and if you can love, no matter how you hurt, love will come to you. Back to you. This world is yours. At times I know it's gonna be hard when you think you can't go on, but there's a plan for you. Just let your heart follow through. Come on, I promise you can do it all. 'Cause where you fall, you can always start again. Your future's right in front of where you stand. If you believe everything you dream will come true, and if you can love, no matter how you hurt, love will come to you. Back to you. This world is yours. Climb a mountain, cross the ocean, sail a river until it opens. Make good friends, listen hard, let it out, and dance on. If you believe everything you dream will come true, and if you can see there's nothing that can be too big for you. No, no. If you can see, if you can believe, if you can dream, this world is yours. Yeah. This world is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, this world is yours. The boards are out there for you. When you get onto the board, or if you're already serving on the board, just be our ambassador. Put your best foot forward. This world is yours. On behalf of the Women on Boards Network, congratulations. Really, really proud of you and wishing you the very best. I want to request Faith Gitonga, Faith Nkatha, who is here and who is also a member of the board, to add her voice to that. But before I do that, I want to recognize a special lady. And this special lady has given her all, has really, really gone out of her way to make sure that you went through this program, that the program was wonderful, that the speakers were lined up, that she moderated the session so beautifully. She gave freely of herself. She emptied herself for us all. And Rose, that is you. And I want to pray that your cup will forever be full because you have emptied it on our behalf. Thank you so much, Rose. Over to you, Faith.
Thank you, Catherine.
Faith? Did Faith drop off? Maybe she did.
She's on the call, yeah.
Yeah, Faith, are you there? Okay. Rose, let me then hand over to you. Maybe we are having a problem with Faith. I will try and reach out to her, but thank you so much, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I wouldn't have done it without the help of the Secretariat. And so allow me to mention Kantai, who's been great at pushing me as well, you know, getting things moving, all these flyers and certificates that you see. She's done a wonderful job, and we really want to say a big thank you. Of course, to Agnes as well, and Hannah, asante sana. It's been such a pleasure working with you on this program. So Catherine, we do have a surprise for the ladies, don't we? There is something that we are launching this evening. So may I hand it back to you so that you can tell us what that little surprise is and what's coming through effective tomorrow. Catherine, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rose. And this will definitely be of interest, particularly to Patrick as well, who has done a lot of this, who has done a lot of public service. Kantai, can I ask you to put up the slides for me? So ladies, you have gone through a 6-month program, mentorship program that has prepared you for sitting on boards, that has not just prepared you, but for some of you who have already been sitting on boards, given you the tools to actually be better board members. Now, effective this coming July, we are now going to launch another program, which is Women in Public Sector Boards. So we have always had that public sector boards are slightly different from the normal private sector boards. And there are questions that have been asked over time. How do you get into a public sector board? Where are the, how do you avoid the pitfalls in public sector board? Where are the bear traps, so on and so forth. And so we thought, and thank you, Rose, for putting all this together again. We thought that perhaps the next mentorship program should focus on public sector boards. On to the next slide, Kantai, and we will begin it in July of this year and up to December. It will also be a 6-month program. It will be free for all our members. And that program will allow the participants to tap into the existing knowledge, skills, and experience of high-performing board experts within the public sector, chairs of public sector boards, board members who have sat on public sector boards, commissions, so on and so forth, to share their knowledge on how you become effective in public sector boards. This program will be run pretty much the same way we have run this particular one, but focusing on public sector. And in terms of guidelines, again, Kantai has shown those on the screen. We will be asking members who want to participate to ensure that they are committed to the program, to ensure that they're really, public sector has to make you tick for you to be effective. So are you somebody who really wants to serve? Because public sector is about serving, So we will be expecting you to benefit from that program. if you're really, really interested in public sector. The eligibility criteria is as set out. You have to be a fully paid up member of Women on Boards. You have to be interested in joining and serving in public sector boards for you to be selected into that program. On to the next slide, Kantai. So we shall kick off on 1st of July. And when we do kick off, we will start, and hopefully the situation allowing, we might have some physical meetups as well. We will have 5 sessions over the 6-month period. We'll start off with 2 hours in July, where we will just share with you an overview over the program, the guidelines, and how how you can be effective, what is expected of you, what you expect to learn from the program, so on and so forth. Then that will be followed by 5 group board mentoring sessions again. We expect that each one of those will take 2 hours. We shall share the names of the mentors that we have reached out to, all very eminent public sector leaders. And then we shall graduate in December of 2022, where we'll have a program such as this, where we'll share our experiences, and we call it a day from there. During the mentorship program, we shall also ensure that you get into perhaps smaller groups that you can discuss some of the issues that you have learned and how you can overcome any challenges that you foresee. On to the next slide, please. Okay, so that is the program that we are launching today, and we will be sharing this information with the greater membership so that they can join the program and to make it as lively as it can be. And maybe let me just pause here. Patrick, what do you think of that program?
Thank you, Catherine. I think it is worthwhile because I've sat on boards and do sit on boards that are on both sides. And the public sector, whilst may sound simple, but the bureaucracy of running a board in the public sector is something else.
Yeah.
And whilst the governing principles are the same, the whole essence of the public sector and what you need to understand, etc., is something out of this world. I'm still learning, even now, sitting as a board member. And I'll give you an example. I'm supposed to travel for personal things to Houston, and then I'm going to Mexico. I have to ask for permission. And it's my own stuff. I mean, I'm not doing anything for the government, but I'm being told you have to get permission from the head of public service.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You need to learn a lot. There's a lot to learn around how just to be able to operate within the public board membership.
Thank you. Thank you. And the relationships, in fact, I call them interrelationships, are just a maze. Yeah. It's like going into that park and you're trying to find your way out, you don't know whose toe you're stepping on, whose finger you're cracking. And it's just so important to learn how to thrive as a public sector board member. So that is the program that we are launching. And please let everybody else know about it. We shall post it on the walls so that those of you who desire to serve do come on to this program. When you get into public sector boards, it's fulfilling when you see the change that you enable, when you see the value that you deliver, when you see Wanjiku receiving the service, it is fulfilling. And so it's not about the money, it's about service. And that is what we want to ensure, that you are aware of it. Even as we clamor for those positions, we know what it takes to sit on the public sector boards. Rose, back to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Catherine. They say service to society is the rent you pay on this earth. So thank you for, accepting to allow us and to give us the space to be able to undertake this mentorship program. So you know what they say, we all need someone who inspires us to do better than we already know. Mm-hmm. So I really want to say a big thank you to Patrick for being with us this evening. If you don't know, well, Patrick actually accepted, very last minute.
Yeah.
We sent him an email, and I suppose, with all the travels and his busy schedule, it must have skipped his diary. But thank you, Patrick, for coming through to us, even when we knock at the very last minute. So asante sana.
Thank you.
I don't know whether—
And Rose,
Yes.
before you conclude, just to say to the ladies, we are planning an event where we shall have all the participants who have gone through our programs, including this one, to meet up and to have a get together, because we have done all this virtually. We are hoping, and I think the Secretariat has a date, which we shall share very soon, that we'll come together physically just to share some learnings. And so that information will be communicated to you. I know there was a request from some of you, and so that will happen. Thank you. Back to you, Rose.
Thank you, Catherine. So I know we'll have a bit of a networking interactive session here, albeit virtually. So at this juncture, allow me to really thank our guest speaker this evening for sharing his thoughts around the topic on breaking new ground, for boards. Thank you, Catherine, and to the entire board for giving us the opportunity to engage. We don't take it for granted that we have this space to be able to be vulnerable in a very safe space. To the Secretariat led by Mrs. Wanga, Hannah, Kantai, we really want to say a big thank you. A lot of the times we don't know what really goes behind the scenes, but there's a lot of work, and we may not say it too often, but thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Finally, to the ladies, thank you for accepting to be part of the program. We would not have done it without you. Thank you for being on time, for asking the questions, for participating as well and sharing experiences. To the ladies who managed the virtual sessions when we broke out from the main plenary, we really want to say a big, big, big thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, Kantai is sharing the stage with me. So I'll invite her so that then she can take us to our virtual networking session and tell us a little bit about it. So Kantai, over to you.
Let me leave now, and you can now enjoy yourselves in an even safer space. Thank you very much for hosting me, and we'll meet again in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick, but we know your heart is pink, so thank you. Thank you so much.
Right. Yeah.